a lot of the male sales tactics, like I don't know what I'm talking about. And again,
word of mouth is still as strong today as it ever has been.
Because I've never attempted private party because that aspect is too daunting. You know, you'd have a couple back and forth messages and they'd disappear.
So you build business based on that, like the experience, right? And consumers are just like dealers. They want as much money as absolutely possible. Do they want to go, like, do they feel comfortable when they walk in? Are you educating them? Do they feel comfortable to where they don't feel like they have to make a decision? The old school methodology of trade-in process has to die.
Are you wasting your time and money on inefficiencies in the business? Are sales down and lead conversion rates are low? Are you having problems building or maintaining inventory levels? What does it really take to win in the automotive industry?
Get the cars that make sense for your store rather than just wishing at an auction. So it gives you that better control.
With over 25 years of experience, Darrell the Wolf Steed isn't just another industry voice. He's the guy who's out there solving real problems for dealers just like you.
They'll even say in the Pacific Northwest where you're at that it's a tougher market. It's, you know, it's tougher to find cars. The market's a little bit softer. And in the midst of all this, your turn doubled and your profit's up 75%.
Yes.
The truth hurts only when it should. Are you ready to hear the truths? Darrell is here to unpack the hard truths and the proven strategies that will take your dealership from struggling to soaring. And he is taking it all in the streets, with real talk, open dialogue, unfiltered conversations. This is the podcast series, Street Smarts, powered by Smartwolf Consulting.
Hello, everybody. This is Darrell Steed, your host of Street Smarts, powered by Smartwolf Consulting. And today we get a real privilege here, some real insight, guys. I have a special guest that is joining us that is an actual customer that went and wanted to sell her car private party or to sell her car in general, and ended up transacting with a buying center. And so we're going to have a few minutes to be able to talk and kind of see that customer journey. And there's also some kind of unique things that happened with this guest journey. So we're going to kind of explore that as well. So with no further ado, let's welcome Sarah Molina to the show. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
So Sarah, you decided that you had a slightly older vehicle and you wanted to sell it or trade it. And we're kind of going through what you wanted to do or how you wanted to do that journey. So kind of take us through what your thoughts were when trying to get rid of your vehicle.
Well, I have sold a few cars before. I've never attempted private party because that aspect is too daunting. But when I was ready to sell this car, I live close by the Dodge dealership that I sold it to and saw the signs for a buying center. And I don't think I'd ever sold just to sell a car. I'd always been to trade it in to get something else. There was always kind of a double deal going on. And so when I knew I wanted to sell, I needed something bigger. I went into Dodge, and best experience by far because of how quick and efficient it was. But yeah, I've done the trade-in. I've done the selling to I think it was like a leasing department, but it was through an agent rather than going to the dealership. Then I've sold to pot lots before as well. So I hadn't had any great experiences, so I thought I'd try something different.
And, it's interesting that like when you're looking to sell it, your immediate reaction was you didn't want to sell it private party because that's too daunting, which I mean, that's music to my ears. But explain to me, when you say daunting, what is the reservations of dealing in the private party or selling private party?
Well, I'm not a big car person. I don't know a lot about cars. I can obviously read everything online and research what I think my car is worth or what the internet dealerships think my car is worth. But I don't want to spend that much time on it. My free time, I want to keep my free time. And I have family members that have sold private party. I've had friends that have sold private party. And it's a job. It's basically the job that a dealership would do, but you're doing it on your own, but without any it's almost like without having a background check. Everyone that's reaching out to you, you're like, it could be a bot. It could be a shady person. It could be a real person. It could be, someone else who doesn't know anything about the value of the car. There's just too many variables that I don't have time to have 500 conversations until I find the right person. So I've, always thought about doing it, but I'm like, no, I don't even want to take the time to bring my car in to sell it, let alone have to deal with all of those variables. So
No, I think that's extremely interesting, and thanks for sharing. As dealers watch this, it is a kind of it's one, a pleasure, but two, a treat to actually talk to people that aren't in the industry and what they go through and what they think. Because I think when I deal with a lot of dealerships, we try to build these buying centers or these different experiences for customers, and they have their own ideas of what customers want to do or what reports have said. And so when we actually get to hear it, like the thought process behind it, I think that's very encouraging. But more importantly, we have to take notice and listen of this is what somebody actually went through, their thought process, why they like it, why they don't. Now, before I go into you being able to engage with a buying center and the experience and how that went, you also had, when I got to talk to you earlier, you also had some of your family members shortly after your experience actually listing on Private Party and kind of dealing with some of the things you just talked about. Can you share with us exactly what that was? And I believe it was your sister who went through this and kind of some of the aggravations or roadblocks that she ran into that inevitably made her want to go a different direction as well.
yeah, I mean, it made me thankful that I didn't go down that route, but actually I had several family members. So my sister and my niece both put their cars up on Private Party on Facebook Marketplace, I believe. I don't know if there was some Craigslist, but the second they put it up, they were inundated with like 1,000 email messages, which is just not possible. She has kids, she's got a job. It's not possible to go through all of them. And the worst part of the experience for her was that half of the ones that had interest, so she's like, okay, I'll bite. Let me reach back out and talk to these people. Half of them then, you'd have a couple back and forth messages and they'd disappear, whether they found another car, whether it wasn't a real interest, whatever the case may be. But she still had to take the time and effort and work to go through, to do the haggling. And for her, she took it off and put it back on several times because it got too overwhelming. Like, I don't have time to deal with this. And then when you go back and look a week later, where do I start? And she ended up being able to sell through. It took a lot longer and it took a lot more time. But I know my niece and my brother at one point with an old car, they put it up there and they tried. And then inevitably, too much work. They don't know who they're dealing with. And when you're just there to trust a stranger that this is, you're coming up with the best deal. My niece ended up taking it off and selling it to a buying center because it just, even if you get a little bit less, that's worth my time and energy. So same with my brother. I ended up selling to a family member that ended up wanting it, but he was like, oh, I'll sell it to anybody else I know personally than to have to go through all that on Private Party. So.
No, I mean, I think that's extremely interesting. But since we get access to you right now, and I'm going to try to get as much info from you as possible as a customer, because we don't really get these opportunities too much, is do you think, and I hate saying it like this, but I think it has real validity to what we see is being a female and then want to sell Private Party in the market, or being a male. What do you think the differences are in how you would look at it to like what we would typically say when you brought up, you don't know who you're dealing with, and, the safety and security of that with your sister, with yourself, your niece, even your other family member, the differences in when you're dealing with those reservations, or why it's, having either a buying center or having a more valid place to go has value to you as a customer.
Well, I mean, as anything on the internet, as nowadays everything is on the internet, being a female and doing that on my own, there's just that inherent risk. Now, obviously, I'd never bring anyone to my house, or you would find a neutral. I'd also always take someone with me, never go alone. But you do have those things to worry about versus going into a company and a store that is legitimized and backed up and professional and public and all of that stuff. So, yeah, selling it on my own, you have a lot of those things to worry about as well. Um, but I think there's the old school mentality, right? Being the female going in, a lot of the male sales tactics, like, I don't know what I'm talking about. And again, I'm not a big car person, so I probably don't know what I'm talking about, but I can learn and read, and I can look up the same numbers anybody else can. So I think that's even the difference in my experience with trading in to buy a new car versus just going to the buying center. Was a lot of that as well, that you just have to go in knowing. And I mean, maybe it's better now. I know many years ago when I was selling previous cars, that was a lot of the case as well, because they're trying to get something else out of it on the other side. So,
Sure.
yeah.
Well, I think that's interesting you say that. So we know, and for any of you guys who don't know the references, like when people come in to buy a car, the typical customer experience, and Sarah, you can certainly correct me in your history if I'm wrong in saying this, is we assume most people don't know what they know, like they don't know anything, or there's usually a taking advantage type of mantra for the auto industry. And that's proven true in pretty much every movie ever made about about the auto industry. And so there was always an angle, or what's in it for the dealer. Rarely is there a time where we're trying to figure out what the customer's looking for and then navigate that for them rather than our own agenda in the auto industry. So when you decided, okay, you went to the buying center, they contacted you, and you were going to go do that, I would love to spend a few minutes and talk about, one, did you research any other sources that you could sell your car, any other companies? Two, when you got there, kind of like walk us through, like, what did they send you? How did they talk about it? Did it match when they got there? Because I always build things to assuming the customer wants it to be consistent throughout the whole thing. But you as a customer, where were they? What did they do well? What could they have fixed? And how was it different than, let's say, the last time you went to, trade a vehicle in?
Yeah, well, on this one, I did reach out because I knew I wanted to sell. I knew I didn't want to do it private party. So I reached out on my own, and the research on my side, probably what most people do, you look at Kelley Blue Book, you kind of look at a couple different sources to see if they're all saying the same thing. Then you kind of take the average of what it's worth. And I did both. If it's in great condition versus whatever someone might say it's not in great condition, kind of what a general range of what it would be worth. So when I reached out to the buying center, I think the biggest difference I noticed was, again, someone not knowing a lot about it, was the way that they interacted, where they can still have the mentality of, here's this girl that doesn't know anything about cars, I can maybe get away with some stuff. But when they were just buying it, it's numbers, which most adults can understand. Even if you don't know car industry, you can spell it out pretty easily, just saying, here's how much it's worth, here's how much we can pay for it. And a lot easier to explain when you're just dealing with one side. And I think that's what they did really well, was it wasn't just, here's what your car's worth. I got to see, here's what various other places say it's worth, here's how much we can pay for it. And then also explaining, this is why it's this price. Let me tell you what we saw on your car. Let me tell you how much we're going to be able to sell it for maybe in the future, and why things are priced this way. So it just made it a lot easier, and they could explain it in a not condescending way, I guess I could say, of just, all you have to do is understand the numbers and understand you're seeing the same thing I'm seeing when we look at your car. And they just had a lot more information on, here's the year, here's what they're generally going for in the area. So again, you just feel a little bit more confident in those numbers that they're presenting to you, and confident that they're not trying to finagle a deal somewhere else.
So, and I want to make sure that we're understanding your viewpoint is them educating or having a conversation about it with the industry insights, whatever they were able to show you, and then empowering you to make a decision based on other sources, right? The validation from more than one source allowed you to feel, or at least, be okay with the fact that you weren't being taken advantage of. You didn't feel that there was this underlying tone of deception because they were able to validate things like that for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and again, I don't know if times have changed, but in the past, it's kind of been, well, here's what we can trade it in for, and here's what you can get towards a new car versus just taking the money, and who knows when you'll get that money. But I don't know if it's condescending, but it's like, oh, it's kind of, this is over your head. You probably wouldn't understand how we figure out all this car stuff, like you just, all you need to know is the numbers. Whereas this experience was a lot more like, even if you don't understand, I can at least lay out all the numbers, exactly what we're looking at, why and how we got to our number. And then I can ultimately decide, yeah, I'm willing to take that, or no, I'm not. Right. But I like that there wasn't a ton of finagling back and forth, because it was just a very clear cut, this is how much we have, to kind of take it or leave it, which maybe some people like bargaining and going back and forth. But for me, it just made it, I just have to make one decision. Am I going to take that amount or not? And they were very matter of fact. There wasn't any, let me see what I can do for you, kind of, which is in my head, whenever going into a car dealership, that just means that's not the real number. They're going to keep going back and forth as long as I want to. So,
well, I'm going to be 100% honest. I'm kind of glad you said it just like that, because, it does. It's that, well, if you're willing to go back and forth, then where was the real number? Do you think by the buying center that you went to, them showing you the KBB or the other values from other third party, did that make it, I don't want to say easier, but did that ease your mind of, you knew you were getting a fair, good, better than fair, whatever you come to in your guide of like where you got there, rather than if they gave you one number and said take it or leave it, and not knowing? Did it help with having those different validation points, or no?
Yeah, well, sure it did, just because you were seeing more than one source. And I think anytime you can see more than one source, it starts to be more believable because numerous people are saying it. But it also helped that, if you're looking like at a CarMax number, or, whatever other numbers they were pulling from, that it saved me the time from having to go to various other dealerships, to various other online sources, or whatever it may be, to try and get that number. Because a lot of the places I want to get a number, it's fill this out online, we'll get back to you. But that get back to you feels a lot like sales calls, so it's just, again, the time of, you can pull it all together for me here. I go to one place. It took them no time at all too. That's a big factor. Me having to drive around and find different numbers from a bunch of different places takes up my day. And for something like selling a car, I'm like, I don't want to spend my time doing it.
Fair enough.
They get paid money to do it. And
yeah, we have better things to do than trying to figure out how to sell a car. Now, I want to spend a little bit of time, because we talk about your sister and your niece, but I think this is something that dealers, one, need to hear. One, because you had this experience, which, and two, I think this happens more often than not, but we don't take time to contact customers or to actually hear their journey or how they get about it. So you end up selling your car, and then inevitably your niece and your sister are looking to do that. And you immediately referred them to this buying center because of that.
Yeah.
And kind of walk us through, one, why you did that, and then two, how it went with both of them. Because I know that, if I remember correctly, one sold and then the other one did sell in private party because they got a little bit more money, but that's okay. That happens.
Sure. Yeah. So they knew that I had just recently sold my car. And so then they were looking, it was within a 6-month period, I believe. And so they were looking to do the same thing. So, like we do with everything in my family, we chatted about it. What was your experience? And they both ended up going to the buying center to get numbers. And yeah, that's correct. One ended up selling at the buying center, and one ended up continuing private party. But the biggest thing, and this was with my niece, and where we're very similar, is she's like, I don't have time. I can't on my own I'd have to hire someone to go through all of this stuff that I'm getting online, and then not knowing who's for real and who's not. And she's, my niece, she's much younger than me. That's not something that I want her going and doing on her own, selling to someone. So she had come in, and she even made the statement, which is exactly what I had said when I went to the buying center, where she was like, I don't even care if it's $500 less, if I can get it done like this week, be done with the process, have the money in my hand, and also zero headache. So for her, that was kind of her mentality in her car. I can't remember what year it was. I think it was a little bit newer, but so for her, that was very much worth it. And they did. The number ended up being close to what she was trying. And I've noticed this with all my friends and family that have done it. Private party, you tend to ask for more than you're probably going to get in a dealership. But it was pretty close to her number. So for her, that little difference was nothing. I mean, honestly, it wasn't losing money because she's gained all her time back. My sister did end up, she went in, she got the number. It was lower than she wanted. So she went back to try one more time to do private party, but she did mention to me that, she's like, I think I can get more. However, if it keeps taking too long and I keep dealing with the same people who reach out and then I don't hear back from, and I've wasted a week of conversation on, she's like, then inevitably I'll come back, because another bonus is you get your money right then and there.
So I think that's interesting, right? Like that, from dealers that get to watch this. And I hope they really take into account that, like, when a customer's talking, to like really hear what they're saying is, someone did that within 6 months, someone else is doing it, and then there's a referral, right? So you build business based on that, like the experience, right? And, and like you said, most people do want to ask for more, which, so that we're all clear, and dealers, as I talk in this podcast, you need to understand consumers are just like dealers. They want as much money as absolutely possible. So for them to ask more, there's nothing wrong with it. But then there is that convenient standard of, are you getting paid? Does it take a lot less time? Most people's time is more important to them than a certain amount of money. Now, it's different for every person. Like for me, like if you're saving me $100, that's not enough. But then for some people it is, and you need to understand what that is. Sarah, when you were going through this, and then you said you ended up, and what I thought was interesting about this too, is that you sold your car knowing you were going to need another one. But again, you had that, and I don't want to say like mistrust, but it probably was a little bit of that of the auto industry in the past, of if it's a trade-in, I've got to deal with this, and it kind of becomes kind of muddy and murky. I think it would be misserved if we didn't kind of talk about that a little bit. Is like, you ended up going and buying a car, but you had sold your car before that. And why was that? Was it to keep it clean? Was it so that you didn't have to deal with what you dealt with in the past? What was the motivation behind doing it in two different transactions?
Sure. I didn't love my trade-in experience the last two times I had done it. I will say a caveat. I'm in a fortunate position that I could, and I ended up leasing a new car as well, but that I could lease before selling. And I think with the leasing also, if not needing a down payment, there were a lot of different reasons that went into it, but I was fortunate to not need it. But at the same time, one of the things I don't like about trading in is it feels like a forced hand. Like, well, I'm trading it in, I need a car to get home from here. So it just kind of feels like I'm doing it all in one fell swoop, which I get can be convenient in that you're done with both ends at one time, right? But the last time I did it, that was a 2-day process. I was there the day I got my car all day long. And again, if I've got to sacrifice one Saturday, so be it. But not wanting to do that, I didn't want to have to take that time. And I didn't want to be forced into getting a car just because I needed it at that moment, or I was trading in at that time. I wanted to be able to think about it because I wasn't really sure what I wanted. I knew I wanted to go bigger, but I just want to take my time with it. And I was going back and forth between purchasing or leasing. What did I want? So for me, knowing that that was an option and I hadn't done it before, I was like, well, I'm going to try it this way, because it felt like a lot less pressure on me to have all my answers and all my research done the second I'm going in. So that it was very convenient for me. I understand maybe not everyone can do that, but it saved me a lot of time and effort. I feel like that, and stress when you're going in and it feels like this one or this one, hurry up and pick. You gotta do this in order to sell your car. So, I never liked that aspect of it.
No, I think that's valuable insight. The fact that you went and leased your car or purchased it, it wouldn't have mattered, right? But you went and did it before you liquidated your car. I think that's a real lesson to dealers right now. I mean, they should hear that. And like we'll see if we can't even have that repeated in this, because you essentially said that trade-in process was, it just wasn't great. It was mistrusting. It was like, it didn't feel good. So you rather go and find the car you wanted and then sell your car after, because you were trying to make sure you never felt that pressured, or that like you weren't getting the best deal, or that you were forced to make a decision, which I think is something dealers need to hear. Is, we're talking about your experience going through a buying center, but it kind of ties into everything. It ties into buying a car, it ties into liquidation. And more importantly is, yes, there are the people that $100 or $200 is going to matter. And we don't want to then not give them a voice, because sometimes people are going to grind every dollar they can because they need to.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for the most part, an experience or time, or, especially with people that have these jobs where they like taking time away from that costs them more than what they're obtaining, is you have to look at that customer experience. And one, do they want to go, like, do they feel comfortable when they walk in? Are you educating them or giving them all the information so they can make an educated decision? Whether or not they like that information, that's here nor there, is, are you giving it to them to do that? And then, like you said, which I think is very important, do they feel comfortable to where they don't feel like they have to make a decision, that they want to? Because I think when we want to do something, we don't have to. I think it creates a very different way that the end result goes out. Now when you look at this, and you went to the buying center and there was an easy experience, was there anything that stood out to you when you were there, so that you'd contacted them, they kind of told you what to expect you get there? Was there anything that was like really stood out that you were like, wow, like that kind of impressed me, or that was like something that you remembered about the experience?
Sure. Well, there were two things that kind of solidified to me, for family, friends, anyone that, cares to ask, or that I find out about, that I'll always recommend a buying center, is one, how quick the process was. That just the amount of time that I was at the dealership, how quick that was huge for me, that I could essentially like go do it on my lunch break if I needed to. And then also leaving that day with a check, and knowing that they take care of all the like DMV and the paperwork, again, stuff that I don't want to sit and question if I've done it right, and what, be stressed out about that, and being able to go home with a check in my hand was, I just hadn't experienced it. So for me, those are just two huge things, right? Time and money, that if I can get those the most efficiently.
Oh, it makes sense. I mean, I don't think anybody in the world would disagree that time and money are two of the relatively big things in most people's lives. Family's probably in the top three. In most people's, I would say those three are in top five of everybody's, but they're usually in the top three of most people. I just wanted to so that people understand there's certain things that when people experience them, they remember. I mean, so much so you referred family members immediately within the year that were looking for the same thing. And then, buying a car, separating that transaction, not saying that dealers, you don't want to have a buying center, but when you think about that, if your experience was better on the trade side, or when you dealt with trades, maybe this doesn't happen, maybe it does, but you think about all the years, and Sarah, she's mentioned she's bought more than one car. So it takes one or two of those times where it's like not great. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden you're like, man, they're looking for something different, because we're doing a lot of the same rather than something that's more served towards the customer's experience. So I think that's super important. Now, when you're just sitting there either searching for a car, or you're looking at selling a car, just because I want to just spend a few minutes before we wrap up and let you get back to it, is what, like, as a consumer, when you're looking at that, what are things that you think? And before you answer this, okay, we want to make sure we give a PSA to all these dealers out here so they can take notes. But when you go into dealerships, whether it's your family's done it, you've bought cars, what are some things dealers need to recognize and change so the customers feel more comfortable or better about the experience moving forward? Dealers, this is the time to get your pen and paper. You've got a customer actually telling you what you can do to make things better.
On the selling, on me selling,
buying, anything, just when you deal with dealerships in general.
Yeah, for me, and again, it may still vary female to male on what their comfort level is going into these stores. Um, for me, I did like, because I dealt with a couple people at the buying center, or a couple of different people. And I think one aspect I really like was it was more friendly than, we'll just call it car sales guy. It was much more, you're an adult, I'm an adult. I'm just coming at you as a friend having a normal conversation. And I think too, starting with the assumption that they either know a little bit about what they're doing or start with questions, not just assuming the people coming in aren't aware of what they're looking for, what they need, or how much money they want for their car, anything like that. I mean, they know their car better than you do. I had my car for over 10 years. Um, so, I knew the issues with it. I knew what was good, what was bad in the car. So I think one that coming out to talk to me as we're on the same team, I guess you could say, versus what can I do for you and what can you do for me? I think it just lowered the guard a little bit of I'm not like, oh boy, trying to sell to me and trying to trying to get the most out of me and immediately kind of being on the defense. So I think that was a huge plus there as well. And something that I think most car dealerships can probably get to, but also with the buying center, again, like I had said before, the just fact driven, there wasn't a lot of, well, here's what I think I can do for you. It was like, well, here's what the numbers are in the industry, and it's whether I can do it or want to do it is irrelevant. This is all that's possible. This is the numbers don't lie. 1+1 still equals 2. And this is what we can do. So I think approaching it from that side, again, for me, it made it a lot easier to hear and to kind of compute and figure out what I wanted to do. But it also was just that confidence of like, yeah, I can understand numbers. So if you just lay it out in a very matter of fact way, it made it, again, it's a lot easier. It's not up to interpretation or trying to figure out like, oh, what is she like? What is she looking for? Let's see if I can kind of get on that wavelength and, I don't know, undersell or sell her for more.
No, I appreciate that a lot. Just, one, people understanding. And when you bought your car, was there like, you decided to lease, which this is the first time you did that because you said you've always bought. What was the biggest thing that, like, one, that you liked, and then two, that, like, could have been better? Because there's no perfect transaction, but this is about obviously giving people the real life experience from the streets. And so that they can, if they listen to it, great, and then make changes. If they don't, they can't say they didn't hear it. So when you bought your car, what went well? What could they have done better? What would you like? Like, what made you consider leasing in the first place? What was all the things that you factored into that?
Yeah, the big thing, I had always been, and I don't know if this comes from dealerships I've gone into or comes from general public kind of conversation or stereotyping, but I'd always been really fearful of a lease because the way, and it may be the way my parents talked about it, but the way that most people talk about it is kind of the same thing with renting, right? You're throwing away your money. So why would you do that if you can afford a car payment? Why not buy versus lease? And so I think I just never had even considered it. Didn't even look at what a lease looks like. And this time around, again, I knew I needed to get a slightly larger car for kids, for a dog, for the family. And I also knew that it wouldn't be permanently I needed a larger car. So that was one factor. I knew that for a time I would, but not forever. I don't want to have the mom SUV for the rest of my life. So I just knew, okay, it's kind of, we're in a short time frame. And then the second was, and this is something with the trade-in that was why I was glad I did buying center, was I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted. There are a lot of cars out there. I've always bought a car previous to this just solely based on what I can afford, right? It was like, I have, and to the penny, I have this much money I can give for a car payment, or if I can save up enough to pay in full. So that dictated, basically, it didn't matter what I wanted. It was, I want that car, but I'm ending up with this one because it's just all I can afford. And it will run the longest for the least amount of money that I can pay. So this time was a little different, and I'm not sure what I want. I also don't want to get stuck with something just because it's in the moment. I need to do this today, and this was what they had. This is all they had. So that's what I'm going to get. So they were great about letting me test drive anything and everything I wanted. And then with the lease, being able to get a deal where my monthly was less, it was for 3 years. So if I didn't like this car, I wasn't stuck with it. It was just a really selling point for me today. And they were pretty good about explaining that, because that was a hard thing where I'm like, okay, yeah, but I am throwing money away, right? I'm going to lease this and then turn it in at the end and get nothing from it. But for me, the big thing of not knowing which car I wanted, this gave me the freedom to try out a car, essentially. Not have to put a down payment down. So I could save some of that money, whether that went towards then my now monthly payment, or went towards me saving up for when I turn this in. And now I've got all this money saved to make a huge down payment or just pay for a car outright. So timing in my life really helped that a lot. But them giving the time to sit down and explain that to me and explain how the lease worked and made it a little less scary. It was a huge selling point, because, and it's something my family and friends, we've always talked about too, with cars, and there are other things in life as well, but cars where if I'm not a car guy and I don't know a bunch about it, I don't want to spend my time researching it either, because it's, it's not every day you're going to buy a car. So when I find a place that I like, which I found with most people, them finding a place they like, you like this Toyota store, you're going back to this Toyota store for every car you get after that. And someone asks, like me, who, moved back to California, and I haven't bought a car at any of these places. Word of mouth is really the best I can do. Because if my friend had a great experience, great, I'm gonna go with that. And so now I have that same aspect where I can be like, I had a great time. They were really polite. Not everything goes perfectly every time. Some things take too long. Some things you don't understand, or, whatever. But overall, it was a great experience that now I know when I turn this lease back in, I'm going to try and work with them to buy the car I want, because it was a good experience, because the people were great to work with. They followed up with me. They, any questions I had, they were happy to answer. So I think just, that loyalty to me is huge as well, that if I can find a place I'm comfortable with, I don't mind spending a little more time and stuff like that.
No, I think it's great to hear, like when, again, it goes down to that experience, right? People really want to be comfortable. They, like you said, they don't buy a car every day. Actually, in most cases, it's every 7 to 8 years. So knowing that, and it's usually a large amount of money for the buying public, and we're not talking about the richest 1%. So knowing that comfort and trust is still big things to consumers. I think we try to tell ourselves that, like, no, it's price. It really comes down to that comfort and convenience, and trust is really good. So, first off, I want to say thank you for coming on. I know as a customer, this is definitely new. It's new, obviously, for the industry. I actually researched. I could not find one customer on any podcast or video that would talk about their customer journey, of just from when selling their car for a buying center, but just what their thought process was, the referrals. For dealers, as you're watching this, I think we all need to send Sarah a nice little gift basket. If you need her information, I can get it. But she's just given us some real insights, guys. So if you guys were listening, to kind of give you guys the recap of this, the old school methodology of trade-in process has to die. It's really taking customers that, whether you're a Gen X, you're a baby boomer, you're a millennial, even Gen Z now, to where they don't want to deal with this mistrust, deceptive, icky type of situation. They value the conversation, they value the connection, and they value the validation. She also told us that by being able to sell her car, that the way that the experience went, being able to get paid on the spot, being able to be educated to different values, so that she didn't think she was being manipulated or sold, so to say, in that type of a situation, which we all know was pretty much predicated on the used car business for many of years, and maybe in some areas still going. And then she told you something that we've all known to be true. It's impossible to manage and it's impossible to measure. Word of mouth is still as strong today as it ever has been because she referred 2 people, not 1, but 2, to a buying center. And then just said, as we wrapped up on her buying side, so even though we talked about her selling a car, full circle coming back to buying, that she said now that she had a pleasurable experience, that she would initially go back to that dealer when she's done to give them an opportunity, unless they didn't have what she wanted, then obviously she has looked at options. But then she more importantly said that she would be telling anyone she knows about her experience, because that is the power of the consumer experience. If they feel they feel the trust and they feel that you're empowering them, and not to segregate sexes, but there is a point that we need to address, that is when women go into dealerships, if you treat them like they're anybody else, and then you have the conversation rather than making, as Sarah put it, assumptions that they don't know anything or they don't serve the same purpose in the conversation, that has a lot to do with the fact that they're going to be your biggest advocates. And for those of you guys that don't know, and Sarah may not know this either, but 72% of all buying decisions are influenced by women. So by Sarah saying that it's nice to be treated as an equal and to be treated as like having the conversation rather than being sold to, has a lot of power in understanding how we need to talk to all people, but more importantly, right, the independent person, the independent woman that's going to come in there that doesn't have someone with them so that they can have that pleasurable, trusting experience. Sarah, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart coming on and being a customer and going through this with us. We really appreciate it. And we hope that anything that happens in the future, that you continue to have those type of experiences and not so much the ones you had before in years before. And again, I hope you have a great rest of the year. Happy holidays. And just stay with me for just 1 second so we can wrap this up. Guys, again, I'm Darrell Steed. I'm your host. This is Street Smarts. And I don't know if we could have possibly brought it to the streets any harder than this, because we got someone that did it on their own. And we might actually say that we got the biggest mic drop ever on this podcast. Have a great day. Until the next episode.